Welcome to the Silver Divorce Podcast, where we offer stories, advice, and support to people age 50 plus who are considering or facing divorce. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Pat.
And Pat, before we get started, I want to let everybody know that we are not attorneys and we are not counselors. We're here to share experiences and knowledge we've gained and to help you avoid the pitfalls of divorce. And Pat, you remember the old show Dragnet?
Yeah.
So just like Dragnet, while we are sharing true stories, the names will be changed to protect the innocent.
Absolutely.
So, Pat, let's talk about an overview of this episode.
Yeah, well, one of our topics today is being blindsided by divorce, which is also known as sudden divorce syndrome. And what I mean by that is I'm sure some of you out there have been served with divorce papers and were completely in shock, unaware of what your spouse has been up to. Or maybe you were in denial of your whole situation. Maybe you missed or overlooked all the red flags. Now it has become your reality. I will talk more on this subject later in the podcast, but right now, Lisa is going to talk about a part of the divorce process, one of which is when your complaint is filed. Lisa, before we go into sudden divorce syndrome, let's finish talking about the divorce process from episode 2 about the complaint. Lisa?
Sure. You know, Pat, in these initial episodes, we wanted to delve into the nuts and bolts of divorce. A lot of people have questions about how do I file a complaint? What happens after the complaint is filed? And you'll find that information in episodes 1 and 2. So now we're just going to continue with that discussion and let you know what happens after the filing. First of all, I wanted to explain about uncontested divorces. In the last episode, we said divorces are either uncontested or contested. In uncontested, there are two types of uncontested. One is an agreed divorce, and the other is irreconcilable differences. To qualify for an agreed divorce, you have to have no minor or disabled children. There cannot be a pending pregnancy. No mutually owned real estate or businesses, no retirement benefits, and then you two have to agree on alimony if required or property distribution. If in that case, you simply file the forms and you attend a hearing and then your divorce is granted, and that is after the appropriate time frame. In Tennessee, it's 60 days after filing if you have no minor children and 90 days if there are minor children. Now, an uncontested divorce for irreconcilable differences, there is a little bit more to it. You do have to complete a marital dissolution agreement, agree on a parenting plan, and disclose your finances. And after that, you attend a hearing and then you are divorced. So relatively straightforward with uncontested, but there are still, some paperwork requirements if irreconcilable differences are cited. So let's talk about the most contentious divorce, and that is a contested divorce. So in the filing of a contested divorce, as we mentioned before, the person who files first is the plaintiff, and then the other person is the defendant. So after the complaint's filed, typically the defendant will receive a request for discovery. And discovery is where you're going to be asked to lay out all of your assets. You'll submit proof of income, bank and investment statements, copies of deeds, vehicle titles, medical records, prescription drug records, employment records. It'll even ask you for if you have a lockbox, if you're a beneficiary of a trust. And just know that the discovery questions are developed by the attorney. Typically, the discovery questions are not developed by the spouse or the plaintiff. But what it can be, though, is a fishing expedition. It really sets up the questions for the deposition phase. And you will have 30 days to respond. which is usually less than that, because typically what will happen is your attorney will want time to review your response. And so you may only have 14 days to actually develop your response. But do the best you can, as you're typically relying on other agencies to provide you that information. And what I mean by that, for example, is in my case, I had a discovery that was 12 pages long, and I was working with 14 different agencies to provide the information to me. And they're not always working on your time frame because it's not a subpoena to them. In fact, I had one agency I was working with that simply told me, look, we're not providing that information. If that attorney wants it, they can submit a subpoena to us. And in the case of my bank, they said, we don't know what's going on in Tennessee, but every attorney thinks they need 5 years worth of records. So it's self-service. You have to go online and you have to individually download every record that's there. We're not providing it to you. So those are some of the things that you'll run into that will delay your response. And that's why I say, do the best that you can. Talk to your attorney. Oftentimes, these attorneys see each other in court and they can say, hey, the discovery for this particular case is coming. We'll get it to you next week. There isn't going to be a police officer at your door the day after discovery is due. And then also ask your attorney which questions that your attorney might object to. And I'm going to give you an example on that too. In my case, it asked for medical records for every physician or provider I visited in the past 3 years. Well, there was absolutely no need for that information in the divorce. So my attorney objected and we did not provide that information. So have that conversation with your attorney. If there are questions your attorney's going to object to, then you don't need to spend that time, because truthfully, it can be a full-time job just getting your discovery answers. So then what next? You'll also be asked to do a property inventory. And when you get that, it seems like just an overwhelming task, but it is very important. You will want to do a thorough job in giving your assets value, because Pat, as you know, what happens is that they try to equalize the value of the assets between the parties. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state. It typically means 50-50. It typically means equal. So what happens is that you will put a value, and we're going to go into detail on this on episode 4, on everything that you own. It can set up a trade for other assets. For example, if you own a house together, they will take the appraised value of your house minus what you owe, and that becomes your equity. Each person gets assigned 50% of the equity. Well, instead of paying cash for all of the equity, you can trade a higher dollar item, such as an ATV, a riding tractor, a boat, etc. But just know that when you're doing that asset, a gift or something that was inherited by you, or something that was a family heirloom, and we're talking property, cannot be claimed by the other party. So then what? If you don't reach agreement in settlement, then you'll have depositions. And I mentioned that before. In depositions, the attorney will ask you questions under oath about the items that you submitted in discovery. So very few cases in Tennessee go to trial. It's unlikely you'll have depositions before you go to your mediation in a contested divorce. And if possible, that is something that you want to avoid having to do. It's very expensive. If you think about a deposition, you're paying for 2 attorneys, you're paying for a court reporter, you're paying for the time to prepare for depositions for 2 attorneys, and you're paying for the time for the court reporter to transcribe the record. So a deposition can be a lot of additional cost in going through a trial process. And then the other part to heavily consider in a contested case is if you have minor children. If you have no mutual agreement on a parenting plan, if you two simply cannot work it out and you're fighting over the kids, then the court will work to determine who should have custody of the children. The court appoints a guardian ad litem, and that person could be an attorney, a social worker, a mental health professional. And what happens is that person interviews everyone with a close connection to the child. It could be a neighbor, a relative, a teacher, and they will make recommendations for the judge. It's also possible that you will be evaluated by a mental health professional, and that's really true in cases of drug use or abuse. So, you have to ask yourself, who do you want to make the decision about how your children spend time with each parent? Do you want to work it out together in a parenting plan, or do you want the judge to make the decision for you? And also know that children who are under 12 years of age, they can influence who they live with. The judge must meet with them either in chambers or in the court, and will ask them for their preference for primary residence. But I'm going to caution you again, too, utilizing your kids as a negotiating tool can be dangerous, because if a judge senses that the child's been influenced to gain child support payments for the other parent, they will take that very negatively.
Yeah, and it's just not good to get children involved in adult issues.
Right. It is best to, keep the children out of it. Minor children,
Yeah,
they love both parents. And
absolutely.
if they're forced to make a decision on who to live with, they could be living with a lot of guilt with that decision, and it's really not fair.
Yeah, their perspective is totally different.
Yeah. So that's kind of an overview of once it's been, the complaint's been filed, there's some things that you'll be facing and need to take care of. But let's talk about the emotional aspect.
Yeah.
Oftentimes one spouse does not know the complaint for divorce is coming. Maybe you had some vague conversations about divorce, but there was no decisions made. And then all of a sudden you're getting served and you're completely thrown off track. How do you handle being blindsided?
Well, if you've been blindsided by divorce and served the divorce papers, it is so important to try and retain a sense of calm. I know that's easier said than done, but you have got to try to not let your emotions control you in the face of shock and denial. You must try to put all your emotions aside and take time to process through the situation and try to focus. I realize that it will be a time of emotional upheaval and chaos, no doubt, but once you have settled down and calmed down, read your documents carefully.
Yeah, that is so important,
Oh, my
Pat.
gosh.
You might think that they would be accurate, but truthfully, a lot of the legal documents that come forward have errors in them, and you will want to read them.
Absolutely. That happened to you too, didn't it, Lisa?
Absolutely. Quite a few errors in information
Yeah.
about me that carried on throughout the divorce process.
Absolutely. And, just know also you have a certain amount of time to respond and absorb the situation. Next, I would suggest to find your support system. Who can you trust and depend on? Do you have a trusted friend or a close family member that can help you walk through this situation? I also suggest that you find a divorce care group in your community. It is an excellent 13-week class and support group to help you heal and guide you through the divorce process. I personally highly recommend it. I went through it myself many years ago, and it helped me tremendously.
Yeah, I did find divorce care to be a huge benefit. And, in talking about finding a friend to help you through it, you do want to find somebody who's level-headed, who has a a good sense about them, who's not going to just tell you what you want to hear. And
Right,
not
tell
just
you the
going to-
truth.
Yeah, you want somebody who's going to give you good, solid advice. And
Oh, for sure.
direction. So, in addition to finding support, what else should our listeners be thinking about?
Well, I want everyone to know that you have rights. Do not panic on what the divorce papers state. Usually they ask for the moon and stars, and please know this is just a tactic the attorneys use initially. You need to start thinking of protecting yourself and your future. Do you need a restraining order? Has there been abuse, or are you afraid of your spouse or what he or she may do to harm you? Do your research, get references on a good, solid attorney, and find out what your rights are.
Yeah, Pat, in the next episode, we're going to talk about how to find a good attorney and how to work
Yeah.
with your attorney.
Yeah, and also set your boundaries. And what I mean by that is don't let your spouse or his attorney bully you. If you have to, block all contact from your spouse. You don't need more drama to be added to your situation. That's the last thing you need. Be careful and do not use social media in any way to air your divorce situation, as it can be used against you. Stay away from Facebook and be careful of your phone texts.
That is absolutely so true. It's very tempting, and I've seen people
Oh, yeah, I have
go
too.
out there and they want everybody to know their side of the story. The judges take a very dim view of spouse bashing, and you do want to avoid it. And then also, one thing you need to remember is that just because your spouse says it's true doesn't make it true.
Right.
Over and over, we have seen instances where a spouse will say, I'm only going to pay you this much alimony, and I'm taking the house, and I'm
Threatening.
and just because they say it's true does not make it true. And I can tell you, there was a woman recently whose spouse said, I'm coming and I'm going to get your engagement ring. And it was a 3-carat engagement ring. Well, no, that was a gift. And, typically that gift belongs to the individual it was given to. And so just put it in perspective. Threats are just sometimes empty threats, and talk with your attorney and know what the law says.
And I know it's probably easy if the other spouse is spreading lies about you, you want to retaliate and talk back, and you're just going to have to take the high road and just honestly just keep your mouth shut, because the truth will come out.
People generally reveal themselves in the end. And people who know you and who've been around you, when they hear stories, they will think, they'll say, gee, that just didn't sound like you. I heard this story, but that did not sound like you. And I've never seen you act that way or be that way. So, people show their true colors, and just stay true to who you are.
Absolutely.
And be confident that eventually that person will be found out for their...
Oh, and they will, because I call it standing in the gap. I stood in the back for over a year about some of the things that were said, and finally the other side, the family, came around, and I got a phone call, and they said they understood what was going on now. But I know it's tough, but you've got to just stand and take it.
Yeah, and don't get into text arguments with your spouse either.
Oh, no.
Those text messages can come back to haunt you.
Oh, yeah.
So when your spouse is continuing to text you and trying to draw you into an argument, if you don't have minor children that you need to communicate about, then, block that person.
Yeah.
Block that person's number so you're not under that constant bullying
That's
all
right.
the time.
That's right. And another thing is also figure out where you need to live. Unless it is a hostile situation, think twice before moving out of the marital home. Just because your spouse has filed for divorce and demands that you move out does not mean you are obligated to leave, even if your name is not on the mortgage. And please know this is a huge, huge decision and can impact child custody and other issues during the divorce process.
You absolutely don't want to have them say that you abandoned the family, you abandoned your children,
right,
if you suddenly move out.
And next, and it's so important, and I'm sure Lisa has mentioned this before, but gather all important documents and records. Lisa will go into more detail in episode 4 as she talks about how to best work with your attorney. Here are just a few examples. Your tax records, bank account statements, investment account statements. Just remember, this is a time about yourself and your future, and do not, I repeat, do not sign off on any documents presented to you. Don't let anybody bully you into that. Make sure you and your attorney review all documents very carefully. If necessary, you may need to hire a forensic attorney, especially if you think your spouse may be hiding cash, assets, and other property.
Yeah, that's so important, because even if you're not under a disclosure where you're required to provide all of that information yet, sometimes those documents have a way of disappearing. We hear stories all the time of suddenly, the home office is cleaned out and the spouse can't find the documents.
Can't access anything.
Can't access it all. So that goes along with, make sure you have your own sign-on to all of your accounts.
Yep.
If you have a joint bank account and you both have been operating under one sign-on, get your own.
Yep.
Because you should each have your own sign-on all along anyway.
Right.
Go ahead and get your own sign-on for every single account that you have. So what are some of the other things our listeners should do to set up their own accounts?
Well, the first thing I would do is apply for your own credit card. And I'll have a story later on when we talk about financial situations. I have a story about a credit card issue I had with my experience. But apply for your own credit card and start a separate bank account. If you have a credit card and your spouse is an authorized user, you may want to consider removing that person as an authorized user. Talk with your attorney first. It's a good time to go to the 3 credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, and set up free accounts so you can check and make sure no new credit has been taken out in your name. And make sure...
Oh, absolutely. You can also set up a free account with Credit Karma.
Yeah.
And that allows you to monitor your credit throughout the divorce process to make sure your name's not being used to assume large debts.
Absolutely.
We have seen many cases of that where there is a divorce happening and, the one spouse can go out and take out a large loan.
Yeah.
And the other party is responsible for it because you're married. So you will definitely want to monitor your credit throughout the divorce process. And you can also freeze your credit.
Yeah.
Both Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, they allow you to go online and freeze your credit. If you're not planning to need to have a credit check for any reason, go ahead and freeze it. And it is an instant process to unfreeze it. So, for example... your credit's frozen, but you need to go out and maybe get pre-qualified for a mortgage right after the divorce is final. You just simply go online and unfreeze it. It's instantaneous. So it's just a smart thing to monitor, because you could end up being liable for debt that was assumed during the marriage before your divorce was final.
Absolutely. And like I said, in the future, we're going to talk more about financials and have a financial advisor on our show.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I look forward to that. So I know the nuts and the bolts process is important, but, taking care of ourselves is very important throughout this process. So, Pat, can you talk about self-care?
Oh, absolutely. It's so important. Please practice self-care. I know this is a crazy time and chaotic and emotional time, But and I know you'll feel overwhelmed and stressed. No doubt it will be terrible, but you have to make sure you get enough sleep, eat well, and take care of yourself. I know you're going to be making major decisions that will affect the rest of your life. So, and if you have children, you're going to have to, be healthy to take care of them as well. So it's real important.
Yeah. I recommend journaling.
Yeah.
Instead of finding somebody to vent with, it's often helpful to sit down every morning and journal.
Mm-hmm.
You can write whatever thoughts you have, and then you put it away for the day. And it does not only help you gain perspective,
but it's good emotionally.
It is. And truthfully, I think it helps you sleep better, because there's something about having that download off the brain and clearing your brain that allows you to sleep better.
Right.
And also for women, there are some very good Facebook groups out there that we recommend. One is Divorce Recovery for Women Over 60. It's led by Holly Holloway, a life coach, and it truly is focused on recovering from divorce and healing from divorce. So even though you're going through it now, the more you can focus on how you're healing from the trauma of divorce, the better it will help you to manage the assaults of divorce.
Yeah.
You can't think, once this divorce is over, I'll do that. Do it now.
Yeah.
Start looking at, how am I going to heal? What am I going to do when this is done? What does my life look like in the future? And that will help you tremendously throughout the entire process.
Right. Well, with that said, Lisa, what are we going to talk about in our next podcast?
Well, we're going to continue with the nuts and bolts of the divorce process, and we promise, we're going to get through that, and then we're going to talk about how to hire an attorney. We're going to give you tips on the best way to work with your attorney. And, Pat, these tips can save you hundreds of dollars.
Oh, my gosh, I know.
Hundreds of dollars. And oftentimes, you're going through the process, you don't really know how much you're spending because you don't think of it in those ways. You
want answers, keeps adding up.
You have questions. And so we're going to help save you some money.
Right. Now, if you have questions, Lisa and I are here to help. You can email us at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com or join our Facebook at Silver Divorce Podcast.
So whether you are considering divorce or are newly in the divorce process, we'll help you navigate and tell you things your attorney might not tell you.
That's right.
Until our next episode, remember, divorce is an event. It does not define who you are. I'm Lisa.
And until next time, I'm Pat. See you all then.